Let's get into the text. Genesis 1:27. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God is mentioned 3 times here. God created, he created, he created. The word for create is the word bara. This word in this specific verbal form emphasizes the, quote, initiation of the object in question, and always connotes what only God can do, and frequently emphasizes the absolute newness of the object that is created. This word is especially appropriate to the concept of creation by divine fiat. What is this teaching? This is teaching that God, just like in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God bara the heavens and the earth. He didn't use pre-existent materials. Genesis 1:21, God bara many of the higher level animals. And here in Genesis 1:27, we see that God bara 3 times. God, 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 bara. And this word, when God is the subject, is speaking of something very important. This is the climax of this part of the narrative. The nth day, and it was good. The nth day, and it was good. The nth day, and it was good. And then he creates humans, and he calls everything that he made very good. This is the culmination of the creation narrative. Then we read in Genesis 1:28, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So he creates humans. Then he says to rule over them. So they're made in the image of God. There's a lot of debate over what that means. I can tell you from this verse, it means at least 2 different things. It means that humans are able to understand language. God spoke to them, and presumably they understood what he was saying. They weren't hearing words from God and then coming back and saying, something like that. They heard what he was saying. He communicated to them. They're made in his image. They can understand higher order language. And they're able to rule over creation. Of course, this is a benevolent rulership. So what does that imply about being made in the image of God? Rationality, higher order thinking. We're going to come back to this next week. Skip ahead a little bit. Genesis 2:5, we read, no shrub of the field was yet in the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprouted, for the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth. So there was no man to cultivate the ground. Some people would say there was no man to cultivate the ground in this recapitulation in Genesis 2. Genesis 1 is the big picture. Genesis 2 zooms in on the intimate creation of Adam. And there was no shrub in the field, the arats. There was no man to cultivate the ground. So no rain. This could refer just to the local land. So the fact that it says that there was no rain, that doesn't fit what we know with anything in science. The idea that these plants need to be cultivated, that doesn't fit with what we read in Genesis 1:11, where it says that they sprouted according to their kind, naturally, before humans are on the scene. This is descriptive. This is zooming in on the garden in Eden. And it's describing when and where and how God created. So this could just refer to it at this point. The recap of Genesis 2 could refer to the garden in Eden. Genesis 2:7, then the Lord God formed man of the dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. He formed him. This is the language of like a potter with clay, that he formed him, azah. The other word used here is yetzar, same idea. Now, some people would say this is metaphorical language for God using maybe antecedent materials, hominins, and then he just breathes life into a pre-existent hominin. Maybe Homo heidelbergensis, Denisovans, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens sapiens, one of those, he breathes into their mouth and they get a soul, and then, but the problem with that is, what does the text say? It says that humans are from the dust of the ground. They're from the dust. Is that supposed to be symbolic of actually they're from an evolutionary process? No, in verse 19 of chapter 3, we read, "You will return to the ground." Same word. Because from it you were taken. You were taken from the ground. You are dust. Same word. And to dust, same word, you shall return. When humans die, where do they go? They go in the ground. And what do they turn into? Dirt, dust, worm food. So God is saying, that's what I created you from, and that's where you're going to return. You came out of it by divine fiat, and I'm going to send you back to that through death. That's the punishment of revolting against God. Genesis 2:18. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a suitable helper for him." Literally, the Hebrew is corresponding to him. We read in verse 20, "The man gave names to all the cattle and the birds of the sky and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper suitable for him." God is called the Etzer Kenego in Deuteronomy 33. He's our helper. This is not referring to inferiority of women as opposed to men. At the very least, it shows that men need help. So we see here that God gives Adam a woman. That doesn't fit with the idea that there are tens of thousands of hominins from whom God could select or Adam could select. There's plenty of suitable helpers out there that could have been picked, and yet God is creating one from the rib of the man. The Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and he closed up the flesh at that place. The Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib which he had taken from the man and brought her to the man. Then in Genesis 3:20, we got the fall, and then it says now the man called his wife Eve, because she was the mother of all the living. Of course, in context, what does this refer to? All living humans. I've heard people say, well, she couldn't be the mother of all plants. She couldn't be the mother of all rhinoceroses. She couldn't. Oh, come on. Just a little bit of common sense here would go a long way. Theistic evolutionists say that, okay, here's a more plausible suggestion. It's from Derek Kidner, that Eve gives spiritual life to all people through the Messiah, Genesis 3:15. No, the context is birth. The context is physical birth. And it's interesting that many commentators are so reluctant to put any kind of spirituality into Genesis 1 and 2, that we were spiritual beings. But now it's spiritual life that's coming from Eve. No, the context is giving birth to whom? To Cain, to Abel, to Seth, many other sons and daughters, Genesis 5:4. What about Genesis 4:14? This one ever bother you? I will be a vagrant, Cain says. I'll be a wanderer on the earth. And whoever finds me will kill me. Whoever. God just said right there, Cain, there's only 3 people on earth. You just killed 1 out of the 4. It's just you. What do you mean, whoever finds me will kill me? Well, the standard interpretation here is that Cain is afraid of his future siblings being an avenger of the death of their brother. This fits right into the warp and woof of ancient Hebrew thinking. They had cities of refuge for this. They had blood feuds that happened with this. You put one of ours in the hospital, we put one of yours in the morgue. That was the idea. They had long lifespans. Seth, many other sons and daughters, according to Genesis 5:4. So Wenham, Salehammer, Hamilton, you pick. I mean, that's the view. He's afraid that one of his siblings is going to grow up and eventually kill him. Another view by John Collins, is that Cain was afraid of an animal. In the Hebrew, it's possible to take it, not whoever finds me, but whatever finds me will kill me. Makes a certain amount of sense that you're being expelled from the garden, from God's providential care, and now he's going out into a world filled with predation, animals. Now, to be clear, Collins says it's a little bit of a stretch to take it that way, but it is a possibility. It also could be, according to Collins, just an irrational fear. What do you do when you are A murderer, what do you do when you're caught by God himself speaking to you? Well, you just have an irrational fear. Someone's going to come back and get me. Genesis 4:17. Cain had relations with his wife. Wait a minute, wife. Hold on a second. Now, I might be stupid, but I'm not dumb. Now, this says he had a wife. Now, where did he get his wife from? Well, how much time had passed up until this point in Genesis 4:17? Anybody know? If you find out, let me know, because we don't know. All it says in Genesis 4:3 is that it came about in the course of time. Where are you going with this, James? Cain married one of his siblings. Yuck. Gross. Okay, wait a minute. It says, be fruitful and multiply. Genesis 1:28. Adam had other sons and daughters. That's coming right out of the text, right? Right? Like out of the text, it says there's other people that lived at the same time as Cain. And incest, if you're like, oh, that's gross, Abraham was in incest with his half-sister, Sarah, Genesis 20. So this is the standard view, that Cain married one of his siblings. This goes all the way back to Jewish interpreters, modern interpreters. You might say, well, that would create all sorts of difficulties. See, incest is, first of all, gross, cultural taboo. But the biggest issue with it is that you have defects in your genome. And when you combine your chromosomes together, if you have shared defects, that can produce genetic deformities, genetic defects in your kids. At this point in history, there were no genetic defects. People were made perfect. They were made good, very good. And let me just add, the naturalistic account isn't any better on this. You think there wasn't incest rampant in the naturalistic account? I mean, one study I read recently was that humanity went down to a bottleneck of 1,000 people. 1,000 people. Used to be 10,000. Now they're saying it's 1,000. There's tons of incest. People were having sex with each other like crazy. Brother, sister, cousin. I mean, they had no taboo for this whatsoever. So this whole idea that you throw shade at the biblical account and say, oh, that's gross and stuff. The naturalistic account is not any more beautiful or elegant. At least in this case, what we have is that there's no deformities, no defects, something different. All right, then Cain built a city and called the name of the city Enoch. How is he building a city? He's one of 4 people alive. Well, he has a kid. I guess that makes 5 people. The city is the word Ur in Hebrew. It refers to a, quote, permanent settlement without reference to size or claims of its size. When we hear the word city, we think metropolis, township. Where are you getting that idea? Bethlehem, that little dinky city that archaeologists wondered if it even existed until recently. It was so tiny. That's called an Ur, a city. It's a small village. That's all it was. An unwalled village in Deuteronomy 3:5 is called an Ur, a city. Unwalled village. Or just a group of tents in Judges 10, verse 4. So whatever he built there, don't picture some kind of massive, Babylon or something like that. Something very small. And then Genesis 5, 1 through 3, this is the book of the generation of Adam. In the day when God created man, he made man in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and named them man in the day when they were created. When Adam lived 130 years, and then it goes into the genealogy of Genesis chapter 5. Here's what's important for our purposes here. Here we see that the name Adam, comes from where? That wasn't in Genesis 1. That comes from Genesis 2 and Genesis 3. So here in Genesis 5, when it's saying the first human here's his genealogy, his Toledot, the book of the generations, you start with Adam, that comes from Genesis 2:3. However, it also says that God made him in the likeness of himself. He created, bara, male and female. Where does that come from? Not from Genesis 2 and 3, that comes from Genesis 1, 26 and 27. What this means is Genesis 1 and 2 are describing the same people. This whole notion that Genesis 1 is describing people before Adam existed. And then Genesis 2 is not a recapitulation of that, but is describing a separate creation of God, is falsified by this verse. We see the same thing in the genealogies in Luke. We see in Luke 3:38 that Adam was the son of God. End of story. We see it in 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles opens with 9 chapters of genealogy. The first verse, Adam, starts with Adam, and then it goes right straight through. So, the idea that the image bearers in chapter 1 are different than Adam and Eve in chapter 2, that's wrong. So, how does this fare for the idea of theistic evolution? I'm sure you could see where I'm kind of going with some of this. Number one, I have a few questions. Number one, why would humans need to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth? Genesis 1:28. There's tens of thousands of hominins, according to theistic evolution. Dennis Alexander or Francis Collins in his book. Theistic evolutionists say, or evolutionary creationists is the new term, whatever. They say there's tens of thousands of hominins, and God just selected one of them, Adam, and he selected another, Eve. And they were like the federal head of that group of hominins. Okay, then why are they told to fill the earth if the earth is already filled with tons of hominins? 2, was Adam from the dust of the ground? Under theistic evolution, no. He was from antecedent ancestors. Tons of hominins going all the way back to a common ancestor with chimps and the great apes. Farther back than that, to the very beginning of life on earth. 3, why did Adam have no suitable helper? If theistic evolution is true, there's tens of thousands of suitable helpers for Adam. There's plenty of suitable helpers for him. But instead what we're seeing is the animals are being brought to Adam, he's naming them, but there's no suitable helper. Instead, what he needs is a creation of a woman. Why would Adam, I just thought of this. Why would Adam exclaim, now at last, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh? You can just hear Etta James coming in. At last, he sees this naked wife, and man, she looks good. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. If he's been seeing naked women his entire life. 4, is Eve the mother of all the living or not? If there's a whole conglomerate of hominins, she's not the mother of all the living. And 5, did God merely appear to a pre-existent hominin, Adam? That isn't what the text says. In the text, the author is quite willing to do that. Moses in Genesis 12, God appeared to Abraham. Genesis 15, he ratifies the covenant with Abraham. Genesis 17, he says again, circumcision. Genesis 18, he walks into the trees of Mamre with the 2 angels. Moses knows how to explain that God can appear to pre-existing humans. That's not what the text says. Genesis doesn't teach that Adam was separated from God and then came into a relationship with him. Actually, quite the opposite. The theistic evolution interpretation is that Adam was separate from God. He's just walking around. Then he gets a soul, and then he comes into a relationship with God. Actually, Adam starts in a relationship with God and then is separated. Guys, this couldn't be any more backwards from the text. This is completely opposite of what we're reading in our Bible.